Time to chat with Vincent Heeringa from Idealogue magazine, idealogue.co.nz. Morning, Vincent.
Good morning, Wammo. How are you?
Good, thank you very much. And you went along to the Broadband Futures conference this week.
Yes, I did. The Commerce Commission, which is an odd organisation to put on such an event, did a big conference. About 500 people were talking about the future of broadband, given that the government is spending some billions of dollars lining the country with these big fat pipes for ultra-fast broadband, plus the rural broadband initiative. They thought it was high time that we talked about what we do with this stuff.
Well, did you talk about something other than Stephen Fry? Because that's all I saw coming through on Twitter from the conference was talk about Stephen Fry.
Well, you can imagine the irony of this sort of Twitter stream happening behind the speakers on this giant screen of just this endless comment about Stephen Fry and what it meant and how embarrassing it was that we were having this conference about the future of broadband and ultra-fast broadband and high speeds and so on, while Stephen Fry was lambasting us on Twitter.
Yeah.
And in fact, the conference was it was amazing and yet disappointing, Wammo. The amazing thing about it was that all the sponsors, including the government who put on the event, Telstra Clear, Sky TV, Telecom, and the government all came in for an absolute hammering from the speakers, and then we would sort of hammer Sky TV for their dominance in the entertainment space, and then trottle off and drink their drinks at the in the breaks, which was great. It was democracy at work, but. It was disappointing in the sense that it was a two-day bitch fest about the state of broadband in New Zealand and not enough focus, in my mind, on what we can do with this stuff. Because, you can quite quickly descend into a very technical discussion about the nature of the broadband that's being laid, the quite strong analogy of Mark Rushworth from Pacific Fibre, who says there's no point having a superhighway internally if we're connected to the rest of the world with a dirt road.
Yeah.
And so I found the conference kind of fascinating and yet very technical and very sort of mired still in complaining about the bureaucracy of it, about regulation of the IT and the telco space. And yet it was supposed to be about the future of, and there was, it's almost like we're still arguing about the road and not talking about what's going to drive on it.
Well, it's almost like we need a hui to sort out the stuff that is still wrong and that the legacy stuff that goes back a long way.
It does go back a long way. A Canadian academic who has studied New Zealand quite extensively in comparison with the rest of the world talks about how free market fantasy years, in which telecom really was free to do as it wished, really, and didn't invest in infrastructure quite as it should have, and certainly didn't structure the market to allow competitors, both in a content way and in an infrastructure way, to develop in competition with telecom, and we are still experiencing the outcome of that, which is a pain in the ass.
And the two main problems that I garnered from just viewing it all on Twitter was data caps and content being locked up with companies like Sky. But let's look positive and let's just say that gets sorted. Then what did come out of the conference in the way of what are we going to use this stuff for, and how's it going to create a positive effect on the country?
Well, there were a couple of sessions. I was involved in one of them where on day two, rather than talk about the regulation or the infrastructure, we talked to real businesses who might use this stuff. And I suppose there is this sort of growing awareness. Should only be about 10 years old, that really the fast broadband is going to connect us to the world for services and the export that, perhaps could be the equivalent of the refrigeration ships that allowed our meat to go offshore. Now, this has always been the case, Wammo, or at least it has for the last 10 years. So this is not new. But I suppose it's finally we are getting the infrastructure to a point where we can have high-speed, reliable, cheap broadband. And so there was just some glimmers of hope about the potential for game developers for educational, for media, for content developers to make use of the internet as an export device. And my challenge to the conference was, yes, we have to sort out our domestic scene, but really 80% of our discussion should be about how can we use this to grow our export sector and connect 4.2 million people to the rest of the world, rather than scrapping over what happens here domestically.
And so rather than discussing how we're going to consume the world's content, how we're going to create our own and export it.
Exactly. We need more wetters, we need more Orion healthcares. We just profiled, it's just gone online yesterday, Wammo, the Small Worlds company. I don't know if you've come across them, but do you remember Second Life, that kind of avatar game where you could adopt a different personality and live out your dream?
Yeah.
Well, Small Worlds is a much more, it's a New Zealand idea, much more fun and accessible and less kind of perverted version of that. And it's they're just going gangbusters. They're predicting their revenues to be in the order of about 100 million in the next couple of years.
That's huge.
It's just massive. And, it just demonstrates the growth that you can get out of the ICT sector, out of exploiting broadband. Is just massive, because you're not dealing with a domestic audience, you're dealing with, I think there are something like 3.1 billion internet devices now. In fact, they were predicting at this conference there'd be 7 billion internet-enabled phones available within the next couple of years. That's the market that we need to focus on, and companies like Small Worlds and some of the gaming companies that were on show at this conference are exploiting that.
Okay, cool. And will you be writing up a post about this as well?
Yes, eventually. What I would rather do actually is track the story really and track the companies that are exploiting this opportunity.
Yeah.
And of course we're chock-a-block full of them at Ideologue. I was just looking this morning for story ideas, and there are just so many great examples of mostly young fellas, mostly young white fellas actually, and that needs to change. Hoping to be the next Facebook or whatever. That's probably a tall order, but there's just so much opportunity, Wammo, for in this ICT space, which is why I talked last week with so much enthusiasm about what are we teaching our kids about technology.
Yeah. And we still got you?
Yes, I'm still here. Running out of puff.
You trailed off.
But check out Small Worlds on ideologue.co.nz. An amazing story, and there's a new issue of Ideologue out, in fact, hitting the streets this week. On the cover, Dion Nash with a speaking of cricket, or disastrous cricket last night. But Dion Nash has got a man brand out called Triumph and Disaster, which kind of seems appropriate for a New Zealand cricketer. So that's on the cover of the latest Ideologue.
All right, we'll look out for that. Thanks very much, Vincent.
Thank you, Wammo.
Ideologue.co.nz as well.